Ah, right, we're in business. So, well, again, thank you for coming along. And first of all, with Limekilns, there is this little book, which I should have shown you before. Limekilns of the North Pennines is published in 1999, but it's still relevant and available at £2.50 at the TIC. Sorry, I'll just make myself comfortable. Alston Post Office, Once Upon a Time Bookshop, The Hive in Nenthead, Nenthead Mines, or by post. It's £4 to include post and packaging. And you can contact us. Our email address is admin@Alstonmoor Historical Society, all lowercase, all one word, .org.uk. That's on the website. So here's a quotation from Lime and Magnesia from a book by NVS Nibbs in 1924. He stated that the lime industry has been aptly termed the Cinderella of chemical industries. Compared with others of equal importance, it has been neglected by technical writers and investigators, and manufacturers have been content to use antiquated and inefficient methods of manufacture without serious attempt at their improvement. So that was the state in 1924. Things moved on a bit. Most of the black and white photographs that you'll see were taken in the 1960s, and I bought them many years ago from the archives of Beamish Open Air Museum. So first of all, there's the technical side of things, just so everyone knows what we're talking about. What is a lime kiln and how does it work? This is a typical field kiln near Carshield in Allendale. One kiln on its own is a kiln. A row of kilns is called a bank. So what is a lime kiln? The basic field kiln that we see here is usually set into the valley side. It can be circular in plan, but more often it's rectangular. It consists of a circular pot, which you'll see at the top, about 8 or 10 feet in diameter, with parallel sides near the top, going down and tapering nearer the bottom to a drawing arch. Inside the arch is a drawing eye. Sometimes there's a poking hole around about that level to riddle the mixture if it became clogged. And sometimes there was a small niche on either side of the drawing arch to keep the lighting material safe and dry, or for the workman's bait. A circular pot in a small kiln would serve one arch with 1 or 2 drawing eyes. A large circular pot could serve up to 3 arches. An oval pot could serve 2 arches and 4 eyes, and we'll see examples of these. These kilns are usually found in banks and served by railway lines, so they are the later phase, the industrial phase, rural industrial phase of lime kilns. Lime burning at field kilns was often seasonal, between the months of March and October or November, and weather was a deciding factor for both the work itself and for transportation along roads that were little more than rutted tracks and impassable in winter. Also, many upland kilns were only worked during the summer months by the lead miner farmers for their own holdings. Lead mining is a very old and very basic form of the chemical industry. The potential uses of limestone can only be realized when the stone is strongly heated to the point where a chemical change occurs, that's calcining, to produce quicklime. The formula is simple: limestone, CaCO3, plus heat equals carbon dioxide gas, CO2, plus quicklime, CaO. When the limestone is burnt at a temperature of around 1000 degrees centigrade, it gives off carbon dioxide gas to become calcium oxide or quicklime. The limestone was broken into manageable lumps, usually about 9-inch cubes. The limestone and coal were loaded into the kiln at a ratio of 4:1, and a drop of about 6 inches per hour of the mixture in the level of the charge was considered to be right for good burning. For 100 parts of limestone loaded into the kiln, approximately 56 parts of quicklime and 44 parts of carbon dioxide were produced. Not eco-friendly. However, in rising through the heat of the kiln, the CO2 gas lost another part of oxygen to become CO, or carbon monoxide. The hottest temperature would be a few feet above the drawing eye, probably about here in this case. By the time the burnt lime settled at the eye, about here, it was cool enough to be shoveled out. If there was a left-handed shoveler and the arch was big enough, two men could work side by side to get the mixture out quick enough. The finished product, that is. This one that we're looking at was probably a one-man arch. After being mixed with water, the quicklime powder becomes soluble slaked lime, suitable for absorption on land, and when applied for building use, the quicklime, or in this case lime putty, reacts again with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, rehardening to become lime mortar. So that's the technical side over. I hope you remembered and made notes. This diagram is actually an ancient Egyptian pottery kiln, but it shows that the ancients knew about the use of kilns and heat and quarried materials. The earliest known lime kiln was found in Mesopotamia, dating from about 2500 BC. This is a Greek pottery kiln, not so different from pottery kilns today, and the Greeks are known to have used lime mortar in pavements and aqueducts, as well as in their classical buildings, so they used lime kilns. Widespread use of lime in Britain comes from Roman times. This is Hadrian's Wall, of course, Walltown Crag. And for many centuries, the strength of Roman mortar was a mystery. The Romans are also known to have used quicklime in agriculture as well as for building construction. This is the plan of Housted's Roman fort. Here's the military road down at the bottom, the little white arrow. There's the car park and the visitor centre, and the track up to the fort and the Roman wall along here, Hadrian's Wall, looking north. Although there are few surviving examples of a Roman kiln in Britain, one has been found at the Nag Burn near Housted's. At this point G, this is the Nag Burn flowing northwest, and this is where the kiln was. This is the kiln in question. I think, F.G. Simpson found it shortly after 1900, I think 1912 or something like that. And this is the present surface. So whatever he found, this is what he found, and it's buried again. There's nothing to see at Housted's today. So this is the kiln. On the section and on the plan, you can see a shelf inside the pot. The fuel was timber that spanned across the shelf and on which the limestone blocks were stacked, alternating with more layers of wood. And the initial firing was made possible below the level of the shelf, which we see here. This is Escombe Anglo-Saxon Church in County Durham. The Saxons in general did not build in stone, but they understood the lime burning process. They used lime for mortar in their churches and used it as a wash for their wattle and daub buildings. It could also be used as a sanitizer for putting on midden heaps. This volcanic crater was in fact a pudding pie kiln, or a sow kiln, or a clamp kiln. This example is near Buxton in Derbyshire, and it was little more than a large hollow in a hillside. Here, the layers of limestone and wood fuel were stacked and covered with turf, like the crust on a pie, hence the name pudding pie. Sometimes it could be a long trench along the hillside, valley side, with several drawing arches, like the teats on a suckling cow. Sow, I should say, not cow, hence sow kiln. The fuel was lit and the mixture was allowed to burn for about a week before the kiln was dismantled and the lime and potash were cleared. The potash was useful as the lime in nourishing the soil. Clamp kilns are known to have been in use until the end of the 19th century, but there are no known remains in this area. Another variation was the flare kiln, which was a smaller hollow cut into the hillside with a pot lined with stone, very like the Roman kiln and much the same as later kilns, but with only an arch direct to the pot without a proper drawing eye. These kilns required constant rebuilding due to the method of firing, and few remain, but they may have been converted into the more familiar kiln. Since wood was used for both the clamp and flare kilns, supplies of fuel became scarce and coal was tried. Coal, however, was not suitable for the clamp kiln, and it was found not to work in the flare kiln because the heat it gave was too intense and localized to burn the limestone evenly. The need to find a suitable method of burning coal led to the development of the conventional kiln, which probably came into general use around the turn of the 17th century. This is Carlisle Cathedral, built like so many others in the 12th century. Lime for use as mortar was rare in Saxon times, and it was with the arrival of the Normans and their construction of churches and castles, defensive walls, etc., that reintroduced the widespread use of lime in building. In medieval times, lime mortar was used in royal and ecclesiastical buildings, as well as what we would call civil engineering works, such as bridges and town walls. And monks, of course, used it for their monasteries. The earliest written reference to a kiln in this area comes from the Durham Halmot rolls, when 7 acres of land next to the lime kiln were recorded in 1296. As a traditional cheap internal finish, lime white was made from 1 bushel of lime to 10 gallons of water to 3/4 pound of tallow for each 100 square yards of wall. A more unusual and, to modern thinking, unpleasant use for lime is found in a household manual of 1688. You might like to note down the recipe if you fancy making your own soap. Here we go. To make domestic soap, mix 2 parts of potash to 1 part of quicklime. To 8 potsfuls of lye, add 1 potful of strained suet. Heat to seething in a lead-lined chamber, leave it for a week, stirred from time to time until it has formed a pulse. Add water of musk rose, finally. You wonder how much difference did the musk rose made, but there we are. Whoops. Kilns in the North Pennines were usually built below the limestone outcrop to be quarried. Excuse me. And coal was brought by pack horse or by cart, if roads allowed, from as near as possible. The regular strata sequence of limestone, shale, mudstone and coal in the North Pennines allowed a certain predictability for the location of lime kilns, often with a fuel supply not far away. This is a rectangular single arch kiln near Alston beside the 6277 road to Teesdale, photographed in the 1960s, and note the quarry directly behind it and the convenient access to what was the Turnpike toll road. Coal was probably mined or even quarried at a surface outcrop at Flow Edge or Farnbury, about half a mile over the hill beyond the kiln. This kiln was one of 3, one of which was demolished when the road was rerouted, and another has collapsed. This view shows the almost beautiful dry stone walling of the thin coursed stonework. The 2 drawing eyes, here and here, with their dividing and strengthening pillar, are almost intact, but the kiln pot has collapsed behind them. Note the better quality masonry used for the pillar and that it has mortar-filled joints for strength. The weakest part of the pot was where it was thinnest, just above the eye. This is the part most liable to collapse. This shows a closer still look at the drawing arch with a symmetrically tapering reduction in the width to the shape of a pointed arch in place of a lintel. We can date the first use of lime for agriculture on Ulston Moor from a tithe dispute in 1727, during the early years of the Agrarian Revolution that saw large-scale enclosures, new techniques and new crops. As part of the evidence, it was noted that ground had improved since 9 years ago or thereabouts, that's 1718, or possibly 12 years ago, 1713, about which time one John Ritson, alias Richardson, converted part of a cow pasture into tillage ground and wrought and got limestone in Lord Derwentwater's Liberty in the said parish, and made and burnt the same into lime, and laid the same within or upon the said ground, which occasioned some considerable improvement, and from which the neighbours have made use of lime within the said parish, and since made several improvements thereby. Now, you can imagine neighbours looking over the wall or fence and saying, "Oh, that'll never work." And blow me, it did. The use of lime caught on, but farmers had to be careful because too much lime did not lead to a corresponding improvement in the ground. Frustratingly, I haven't been able to find John Richardson or Ritson or Richardson in the church registers or where he farmed. Written evidence for the use of lime in building on Ulston Moor comes from Garrigal church records when, among the church warden's duties in 1733, included in the accounts was for getting coals and taking lime out of the kill and ruddling it, bringing it to the chapel and working it, getting the fog, that's the second growth of grass after the first mowing, and bringing it ready for stopping. £1, 1 shilling and sixpence. There are local variations in the construction of kilns that might be due to the type of stone locally quarried or the personal preference of the builders. It's interesting to speculate whether there were specialist masons going from farm to farm building kilns. This kiln is somewhere near Brough in Cumbria, formerly Westmoreland, and it has what you might call an old-fashioned milk bottle shape with these shoulders to its drawing arch, with stone good enough for a lintel instead of a pointed arch. It's also circular in plan rather than rectangular. In their General View of Agriculture, published in 1797, authors Bailey and Cully excuse me, wrote, "In most parts of Westmoreland, limestone is found in inexhaustible plenty, but coals to burn it must be conveyed such a distance that its application to the purpose of agriculture has not yet become general. Wider use had to wait for the construction of the Kendal Canal to bring coal into the district." Over in Weardale, just thinking of how to work a lime kiln, this very narrow drawing arch of this little kiln near Cowshill must have been a bit of a squeeze to operate when drawing out the finished line. A bit of a curiosity, this one, an oddity. Still in Weardale, not too far away, at Brandon Walls between Rookup and Eastgate is an example of several extractive industries working in close proximity to each other: limestone, lead and ironstone. The water wheel pumped water out of the lead mine, and the lime kilns were also used for calcining or roasting ironstone prior to smelting. Exploring lime kilns is good exercise, and it takes you to beautiful remote places. Back in Teesdale, you'll find this kiln at Malkin Quarry near Langdon Beck Youth Hostel. There's not much of a quarry behind it, which implies that it was little used. But another kiln nearby at Malkinheath that perhaps superseded this one only became redundant in 1937. And the kiln is now not much more than a heap of stones. It collapsed. Nearby again are the remains of this curiosity, a small ancient kiln where the ingenious use has been made of a natural cleft in the limestone scarp when it was constructed. Here, next to this sphinx profile, is a nice circular wall which would have spanned this cleft here, and a drawing arch, perhaps with a drawing eye here. And in fact, somewhere nearby, there's a chain set into stone which would have controlled perhaps the cast iron door, which regulated the flow of air into the kiln. At the quarrels near Langdenbeck Hostel, again, there was a common quarry and a common kiln for use by local people, the commoners of Forest and Frith. This right in common was a typical condition for land use that went with the Enclosure Acts, that the produce of the kiln and quarries was only for use by the commoners and not for sale. Near Frosterley, in Weardale, this massive three-arch kiln is beside the A689 road at Frosterley, with Stanhope to the left and Frosterley to the right of the photograph. Because of its location and its size, it was obviously built as a commercial or sale kiln. In the 1840s, the limeworks were a large source of employment for Frosterley and Stanhope, and later in the 1890s, there were several limestone quarries near Frosterley whose lime was, and I quote, in great request for agricultural and other purposes. This kiln is above Dadry Shield in Weardale, and strange to say, you can find its identical twin beside the road at Crindledykes near Vindelander Roman Fort in Northumberland, not far from Hadrian's Wall. And again, I have to wonder if there was a roving team of kiln builders, or else a textbook method of construction. And you can see that these arches would be quite weak if left to their own devices. They're so big, and so, but these buttresses are probably part of the original construction rather than a later shoring up to give strength. Again, referring to Bailey and Cully, in 1794 they described the method of lime burning as the mode of lime burning in this county, that's Northumberland, is mostly in draw kilns in the form of an inverted cone with 2 or 3 vents for drawing out the lime and emitting air. Excuse me. They are kept burning and drawing perpetually. Some of the large sale kilns will afford 40 or 50 cartloads a day. A cartload of coal is reckoned to burn 2 cartloads of lime. Excuse me. These kilns are at Dryburn near Garrigill on Alston Moor. Where the limestone came from, I don't know. I don't know where the nearest quarry is. There is the Dryburn itself, which might have been a source of limestones, lime rocks that had tumbled down. But it looks as though one kiln, wherever the limestone came from, one kiln was not enough to satisfy demand. And this site inspired a bit of theorizing. Did the 2 kilns, here and here, work concurrently, or did one fall out of use when a new one was built? But then, if one kiln had fallen into disrepair and had to be dismantled to build a new one, then its dressed stones would have disappeared to be incorporated into the new kiln. And this is not the case here. The ruined kiln has simply collapsed, implying that both kilns were in use at the same time. This kiln is near Burnup Reservoir in Weardale, and it shows a modification in the form of a wall, the pot, the open pot. Whether this was to help the draft or to protect the men from the elements as they fill the pot, I don't know. On the other hand, it could be to keep livestock out, because any self-respecting, energetic lamb could simply jump onto the pot and fall in. The previous photo was taken in the 1960s, but the kiln hadn't changed or deteriorated during the 30 or 40 years uh, later when this photo was taken. Quite a bucolic scene apart from the carbonate. Access to a lime kiln was an asset when selling a farm. As this advert shows, the Turnpike Road in 1830 had only recently just been completed by the great road builder John Loudon McAdam, and a roadside pub just outside the 3-mile limit from Alston was an attractive proposition. The Shaw House Inn burned down in 1916, and it's now a heap of stones on the A686 from Alston to Hartside on the Penrith Road. Lime burning was not without deadly hazards. As an article in the Alston Herald of the 7th of September 1878 reported, and I'll read it out. Suffocated in a lime kiln. A lamentable occurrence whereby 2 elderly brothers named Hugh and Thomas Todd and a young man named John Todd, a son of the former, lost their lives, took place at Whiteley near Alston on Thursday. The unfortunate men were engaged in burning lime, and as is customary with lime burners, though the kiln was lit, they descended into it for the purposes of levelling the stones. It is conjectured that one of the brothers had descended first, and having been rendered powerless by the carbonic acid gas, the others went to his assistance, but were unable to rescue him. About 1 in the afternoon, the bodies were discovered by the wife of Hugh Todd, whose anxiety was aroused by her husband and son failing to return to dinner. Assistance was procured and bodies drawn out, but Dr. Gill, who was quickly on the spot, found that life had been extinct for some time. Here's another report from the Alston Herald, only a few months later, on the 12th of April 1879, about the Greenfell kilns just beneath Hartside Top, beside the A686 overlooking Eden Valley, about 6 miles from Alston and 4 from Melmerby. Shocking death near Melmerby. On Friday, a young man named Joseph Hutchinson met with a sad fate at Greenfell Kilns near Melmerby. He was seen at his customary occupation about 10:30 o'clock in the morning, when carts laden with lime left the kilns. Not long afterwards, 2 tramps came to Melmerby with the intelligence that a man had been burnt to death at the kilns. Hutchinson was found lying dead close to the kiln. His clothes were burnt from his body, and the bones of his hands and knees were visible, the flesh upon them being completely shriveled up. It is supposed that Hutchinson had, while resting, become overpowered by fumes from the kiln, that his clothes caught fire, and that he was consequently burnt to death. This neat little bank of kilns is north of East Leighton in Durham. They were on a mineral line They were on a mineral railway 5¼ miles long, built by an independent little railway company, the Fawcett Railway Company, that joined the Darlington to Barnet Castle line near Gainford at Greystone Cottages. There are 2 kilns, one probably with a circular pot serving 3 arches, one that we can't see, 2 and 3, and 3 eyes. The other probably with either a circular or oval pot serving 2 arches and 2 eyes. They look too dainty to be practical, but in 1890 the nearby limestone quarries were said to employ 150 men and to produce 3,000 tons per week. The limestone made good flux for melting iron. Perhaps, like the Brandon Walls kilns, the stone was calcined. This field kiln with 2 arches and 2 eyes is down a field lane a little distance from the road to the west of a small village of Kirby Hill in County Durham. They could be an example of what I'd call an estate kiln, whereby the estate owner, the lord of the manor, had kilns built that could be either for the sole use of his tenant farmers, with the condition that they must only use his lime from his kilns and not burn their own, or else as a sale kiln, just as the Earl of Carlisle did with his kiln at Netherby, the northeast of Carlisle. In 1772, the Earl's lime works, along with all the rest of the estate's mineral resources, were entrusted to an agent or steward, separate from the land steward. Accounts of finished lime, lead and used by tenants survive from the 1830s. The city of Carlisle was the Earl's biggest customer for lime, where it was used in house building, and after 1818 for the purification process in the manufacture of town gas. At Streatham or Streatham, near Barnard Castle in County Durham, documents have survived to record the commencement of the working life of a kiln. From an account book of the period 1741 to 1752, it can be read that the kiln was referred to as the Kill, and that it had begun to burn lime 3rd of May 1741. 5 days later, on the 8th of May, the first lime charge had been burnt and was ready to be sold either for use on land or for building repairs. So we get the clue that it takes 5 days to burn lime completely. It's interesting to read the quantities by which materials arrived and departed from the kiln. There were coops or copes, carts and horses. Coal for fuel arrived by the horse load, while finished lime departed mostly by the coop. A coop was a wicker basket that contained 10 bowlsful. At the slightly date of this account, in 1751, the same kiln also dealt in chaldrons. Chaldrons were also a measure for lead. Here is an annual account of lime sold from Sir Philip Musgrave's kiln near Brough in Westmoreland from 1758 to 1761. It's a beautifully scripted. The calligraphy is excellent in this. It's not just a scribbled note. Lime production was important, and we can see again that lime was used on land and for building. Here we see it's for cell on or cellar on midden, for building, for the bridge, to the farm, and to the dunghill, used to help the composition, composting. With the advent of railways, the operational scale of lime burning increased dramatically. The railways themselves were great consumers of lime for building railway stations and viaducts, etc. And railway lines were laid into the quarries with their kilns that were opened up on a grand scale, although the kilns themselves were rented out by the company to the quarry owners. This particular group of kilns stood on Crawley side, outside of Stanhope in County Durham, at the western end of the Stanhope and Tyne Railroad. The line opened in 1834 and was taken over by the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1845. There were at least two types of kiln here. One was a bank of fairly small kilns, these very tastefully designed ones, with circular pots and one drawing eye. These have now vanished. And a large group of kilns with oval pots to serve two drawing arches in a large structure with rail access above and below. Here are the later kilns at Crawley side. The previous kilns are probably the earlier ones, dating from about 1834, while these are from about around 1845. The coal and limestone would have been brought from the quarry by narrow gauge rail to the top of the pot and led away by standard gauge rail from the bottom of the drawing arches below. Further along the Stanhope and Tyne Railway, near Consett, stood the East Castle lime kilns. Obviously, they were something to be proud of, a status symbol, with this elaborate inscription. But they were not something anyone would like to live beside. Almost inevitably, Shakespeare has something to say about the fumes from lime kilns. In The Merry Wives of Windsor, Act 3, Scene 3, Falstaff says, "Thou mightst as well say I love to walk by the counter gate," that's the debtor's prison, "which is as hateful to me as the reek of a lime kiln." This is a rare example of an architectural plan for a proposed lime kiln. You'll see here and here there is a bar to direct the finished burnt lime towards each of the two drawing eyes, like a watershed. The fact that the pot is brick lined, you can see this symbol represents bricks, that it is later kiln from the time when railways could import fire bricks to line the pots, giving them a longer life before they had to be relined. You'll see that these fire bricks are tapered to cater for lining the circumference of the pot. These particular bricks might have been made at Pease's Fire Brick Works at Crook in County Durham. They'll be the Pease family of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. This massive kiln is at Allen Heads in Northumberland. The right-hand pot has been used much more than the left, as can be judged from the slump of masonry above the arch and the huge crack caused by settlement due to the expansion and contraction during the huge changes in temperature as the pot heated and cooled. These kilns have been consolidated and a safety rail has been installed around the top, better than this one, and there is an information board nearby. This axle has pulley wheels that were used with a belt for opening and closing the iron doors to the drawing eyes to control the flow of air for burning. If the fuel burned too rapidly due to too much air, the limestone would not burn completely. A slow, smouldering fire was best. This is the left-hand arch of the kiln, and it's a fine example of its kind. The weakest part of the pot, the part most likely to collapse, is just above the drawing eye, just about here above the drawing eyes, and so strengthening pillars were usually incorporated. Apologies for the quality of this photograph. I'll do better next time. At Clowesgill, near Holbank Gate in Cumbria, there was a massive limestone quarry, and this bank of kilns was served by Lord Carlisle's private railway. Quicklime for farm use could be transported from the Earl's kilns at Netherby by road up to 17 miles to reach the point of use. It was always slightly dodgy to transport lime by road or any distance, because if damp got into it, it could expand and bubble and generally cause a mess, but we'll hear about that a little bit later. The location of this bank of kilns at Skiers, near Middleton and Teesdale, precluded a rail connection. It had been operated by Bowley's Quarry Company, and the site was disused when it was taken over by Harold Beadle and Company on the 12th of January 1937. He repaired the existing kilns and gradually put them back into operation to produce agricultural lime, which they did until closure in 1960. The kiln you can see here, surrounded by all the shuttering, was the one most recently constructed in 1941, and it was the weakest one in danger of collapse, which in fact it did, as you see from this diagram here. The Skiers kilns were consolidated some years ago by the North Pennines Heritage Trust, who installed an information board that described the process. For anyone interested in the economics of lime burning, this estimate submitted for lime burning at Parkhead Kiln near Middleton and Teesdale in the early 20th century is a useful document. We see how much the men were paid: 4 shillings and 4pence per day. The cost of coal at 3 shillings per tonne, and the cost of transport to a railway station dependent on the distance from the lime kiln to the railway station. We've got a choice of three here: Crookgate, Broomielaw, and Middleton itself. During the last years of the Second World War, or soon after the end of it, a local farmer and entrepreneur, Jack Peart, using a workforce of German prisoners of war, built a large, odd-looking kiln near Lanehead in Weardale, on the valley side overlooking the Killip Burn. It was sited with the drawing arch facing east, away from the prevailing westerly winds. The line, referred to as clot lime, left the drawing arch in a side-tipping Hudson skips, which were manually pushed along a narrow gauge railway to a gantry, then tipped into the waiting lorries. The lime was pure, very pure, and it went to supply steelworks in Scotland, as well as the agricultural use. The first kiln on the site was badly built, with straight walls that collapsed soon after it came into use. The repair involved a total rebuild, this time with sloping sides, to allow for expansion and settlement with contraction due to the movement of the pot. This kiln, however, was not in production very long, perhaps only a year or so before a government subsidy was removed, making the rural small-scale lime burning uneconomic, and the kiln ceased work. This kiln stood at the top of North Loning near Alston. It was built in the 1870s, but had been out of use for many years before being restored by a specially formed local company led by the local vicar, who was also something of a geologist. And it was more or less a philanthropic exercise for unemployment relief during the Depression of the 1930s. It ceased working in the early 1960s, and the site has since been cleared and landscaped. By this time, industrial lime production had taken over the industry. This is part of the Tarmac lime production plant at Buxton in Derbyshire. And, well, but with advances in technology, burnt lime now had competition. From the agricultural section of the Carlisle Journal of the 19th of November 1907, we find that ground lime is gaining in popularity, not only because of its beneficial effect upon the land, but chiefly on account of the convenience with which it may be procured and applied. In these respects, it compares favorably with slaked or quicklime, and more closely resembles artificial manures. Ground carbonate of lime, CaCO3, can be just as effective as burnt lime or slaked lime. There is generally no advantage in the latter two, and they are generally more expensive. For comparison, 1 ton of burnt lime equals 1.5 tons of slaked lime, which equals 2 tons of ground lime. Ground lime is cheaper per unit and more convenient and pleasant to handle. It stores indefinitely, while burnt lime can absorb moisture, expand, burst sacs, and then set. The disadvantage with ground lime was its lack of purity, but progress had been made in recent years. This is a large bank of kilns at Bishopley in Weardale, built around 1847 on its own branch line from the Wear Valley Railway. There are about a dozen kilns here, one of which has collapsed. It has pots that are oval in plan to serve two eyes, each with a drawing arch. By the time this photograph was taken in the 1960s, as you can see, there's only one pot in use, the finished product being taken away by wagon here. Small-scale lime burning survived here until 1975, longer than anywhere else, but the end was in sight. For many years, Parliamentary Agricultural Acts had made vital contributions, financial contributions, towards farmers' costs of lime production and its transport. the subsidy had been about 60% until the new agricultural scheme of 1964, and then in March 1966 it was reduced a further fifth, which made lime burning in the countryside uneconomical. And so this centuries-old rural industry came to an end. And that's it. That's all I have to say about lime burning.